No. No. Yes, I was right. Before we begin, I'd like to dedicate this video to Andy Knows You. I really didn't have the motivation to switch on the camera, I've got to be honest, but I watched a video of his and it motivated me to do so. So you can thank him for this coming to your screens right now. The pace and the cliffhangers at the ends of chapters have made it so that I have now finished this book. Sorry. I hope that you guys have managed to not finish the book, but to be honest, I doubt that you will have. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the 5 chapters that I'm going to talk about in order, because I think it's important to do so. So chapter 11, Hassan goes cruising, which is just a process of driving around in the car, and comes back and suggests that Colin join this hunting party that the guys are going to go on. And Colin's not too hot on the idea because, you know, killing things isn't really his bag. And then we have a flashback to the Cranial Kids competition, and just before the competition, no, during the competition, because part of it was filming across weeks and weeks. Anyway, Catherine the First comes to Colin for some French tutoring, and they're doing this in a cafe, which is all lovely and nice. So chapter 12, Hassan decides that he wants to take a day off, which, considering the job isn't exactly hard, is pure laziness in my opinion, and in Hassan's opinion and in Colin's opinion, but they gloss over it. So Lindsay and Colin do a day's work on their own, and they go to visit the Oldsters, as Lindsay calls them. It's a sort of retirement home for elderly people. So they're there and they're taking interviews from the Oldsters, who all seem to believe that Colin and Lindsay are together, an item. And Colin thinks that's funny, and Lindsay says, why is that funny? So chapter 13, Colin and Hassan have a fight. Now, do you remember in the last video I was talking about Hassan not having any real drive, any real emotional impact on Colin, any real emotional impact on the story? So the two of them then have to have a fight, which is great. And the basic crux of the argument is that Hassan kissed a girl called Katrina, and which obviously is haram, because he should be dating someone he doesn't intend to marry, blah 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 blah, yada yada yada. And they fight about this even until the next day. They're not talking, and it only ends at the point that Hassan makes a slip up and calls TOC Colin, which they agreed that they weren't going to do because he's not Colin. So they make up, and Colin agrees to go on this hunting trip because he figures he kind of owes Hassan now. All the while, Colin's been working on the theorem, which has been improved by Lindsay's idea to add more variables, and he can make it work in every one of the 19 relationships he's had with Katherines, apart from one, Catherine the Third, and he can't understand why. Colin and Lindsay end up going on a date, which is mainly in order to appease Hollis, because she likes Colin and Lindsay wants to make Hollis like Lindsay, so she needs to make her like it probably makes sense in teenagers' heads. So Lindsay teaches Colin how to fire a shotgun because he's going to need it for this hunting trip. And we have a flashback again to Catherine the First, who was already becoming Catherine the 19th. Big shock horror revelation: Catherine the 19th is Catherine the First. Big full loop of Catherines there. Chapter 14 then. Lindsay shows Colin her secret hideout. Very risky stuff. And she's explaining to Colin that there's a reason why people think he's boring, it's because his stories suck. So she's trying to help him become a better storyteller. And they're drinking moonshine together in this very darkened place, and Lindsay tells Colin the story of TOC and how they got together and how he wasn't perfect and he's different now. And then, you guessed it, they almost kind of sort of nearly kiss. There's a "we really shouldn't" moment. Told you so. So they get home after this, after not kissing but almost doing so, and they walk in on Hollis having an argument down the phone, and they can't really work out what's going on. Anyway, they gloss over it by sneaking out of the house and then making a big noise of getting back in. Hassan's been on a date with Katrina, so they kind of debrief each other on how their dates went, and Colin admits that he kind of sort of liked Lindsay in the moment. Anyway, chapter 15. We have an awkward few days after kind of sort of almost kissing each other, but they kind of work out back to normal, and then it's hunt time. So they go out into the woods, and Mr. Lifford, who's the guy that's leading the hunting party, has a really funny speech pattern. So they all split up into teams, and Colin and Hassan, as Mr. Lifford calls him, end up with Mr. Lifford. But it kind of transpires that they don't really want to kill anything, so Mr. Lifford goes off on his own, and they're left, just Colin and Hassan, in the woods. And Colin calls Catherine III because it's really playing on his mind, and we find out that Colin, in fact, was a dumper, and Catherine III was the only Catherine that Colin had dumped himself. Shock. So, after this revelation, they're ambushed by a wild boar. Which is kind of ironic considering that's what they went out to hunt. And in trying to scare off this boar, they shoot a hornet's nest. And these hornets are chasing them down a hill, and they're running and they're screaming and they're getting stung, and they end up lost. And when they find somewhere that they recognise, what do they see but Katrina, Hassan's new girlfriend, who is naked and straddling some guy. And that's where the chapter ends. And we're left with that. Now, who wouldn't carry on reading there? Right. But I'm not going to talk about that. I think, like I said, John Green has really made a good job of this book, and these last few chapters really just keep the pace going, and you really want to know what's going on. And it's like a detective novel unfolding before our eyes now. I mean, we found out about Catherine the 19th being Catherine the 1st. We're finding out that there's a little bit more going on between Lindsay and Colin than just pally-pally friendship. Hassan's got some more depth to his character. He's a really interesting guy with emotions and feelings and pain and hurt and gosh knows what else. And we end on a cliffhanger. Hassan's new girlfriend, which is a completely new concept to him, cheating on him, which is a completely new concept to him. So yeah, I think I've really enjoyed those few chapters, and it's what made me cheat and finish the book. So I'm going to talk about that next week. Really, I want to know what your thoughts are on chapters 11 to 15 as well, down in the comments below. And also, because I'm coming to the end of this book, I'd like some suggestions, if you would, of what you'd like me to read next, and what we could read together as a book club next. Whether it just be a genre that you suggest and I can pick the book, or whether you pick a book title and I'll go out and buy it and we'll read it together. But leave a comment below, and I will see you next week.